My sister kept using her emergency key to my home until I caught her breaking in on camera. Hi everyone! Today's story will blow your mind, but really quick, if you enjoy this content, hit that subscribe button. Channel's been a bit quiet lately, and your support keeps it all going. Let's jump in. I'm a 32-year-old woman who never expected to be writing this, but after years of being treated like a doormat by my own family, I finally reached my breaking point. For as long as I can remember, my older sister Rachel, 35, has treated my home, my belongings, and my life as extensions of her own. What started as occasional borrowing escalated into a pattern of complete disregard for my boundaries, with my parents enabling her behavior every step of the way. Growing up, Rachel was always the golden child. She was outgoing, popular, and could charm anyone with her smile. Meanwhile, I was the quiet, responsible one who followed the rules and rarely caused trouble. This dynamic carried into adulthood, with Rachel getting away with behavior that would be unacceptable from anyone else. 5 years ago, I purchased my first home, a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a nice part of town. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, purchased with money I'd saved working overtime and living frugally. To say I was proud would be an understatement. This apartment represented my independence and all the hard work I'd put in to create a stable life for myself. Shortly after moving in, I made what I now realize was my first mistake. During a family dinner, Rachel mentioned she sometimes worked late shifts and asked if she could have an emergency key to my place, just in case. My parents immediately chimed in about how reasonable this request was, and how sisters should help each other out. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The problems started small. I'd come home to find things slightly moved, or notice items from my refrigerator missing. When confronted, Rachel would laugh it off. I just needed to grab something real quick, or I was in the neighborhood and needed to use your bathroom. My parents thought I was being petty whenever I brought it up. That's what sisters do, my mom would say. You're being selfish. Then Rachel started borrowing my clothes without asking. Expensive items would disappear from my closet, only to reappear days later, sometimes stained or damaged. When I confronted her, she'd dismiss my concerns. We used to share clothes all the time as kids, she'd say. What's the big deal? The situation escalated when Rachel began using my apartment to host her friends. I'd come home from work to find strangers lounging on my couch, eating my food, and using my things. The first time it happened, I was stunned. Rachel introduced her friends casually, as if this was completely normal. Hope you don't mind, she said. My place is being fumigated, and I told the girls we could hang out here. I pulled Rachel aside and told her this wasn't acceptable. She needed to ask permission before bringing people to my home. She apologized and promised it wouldn't happen again. But it did, repeatedly. Each time with a different excuse, and each time with the same dismissive attitude when I expressed my frustration. My parents were no help. Rachel's going through a tough time, my mom would say. Her apartment is so small, and yours is much nicer. Can't you just be generous? My father would add, family supports each other. Period. The situation came to a head last month when I returned home from a 3-day business trip. I opened my door to find 3 people I'd never met before sleeping in my living room. Empty beer bottles littered my coffee table, and the sink was full of dirty dishes. My bedroom door was open, and I could see someone had been sleeping in my bed. I was livid. I woke the strangers up and demanded to know who they were. Turns out, they were friends of Rachel's from college who were visiting for the weekend. Rachel had told them they could stay at her place while she was away at her boyfriend's. They seemed genuinely surprised and embarrassed to learn this wasn't Rachel's apartment. After they left, I called Rachel and completely lost it. I told her she had violated my trust for the last time, and that I would be changing my locks immediately. She laughed and told me I was overreacting. They're good people, she said. Nothing was stolen, right? Why are you being so dramatic? That's when I realized this wasn't going to stop unless I took drastic action. Rachel had no respect for my boundaries, and my parents were never going to take my side. It was time to protect myself, even if it meant being labeled the difficult sister. This is where my story really begins, the day I finally decided enough was enough. Update: taking control. After the incident with Rachel's friends staying in my apartment, I immediately called a locksmith and had all my locks changed. I also installed a simple security camera in my living room that would alert me to movement. I didn't tell Rachel or my parents about these changes. I wanted to see what would happen. It didn't take long. 2 days after changing the locks, I received a furious call from Rachel. She had tried to enter my apartment while I was at work and couldn't get in. "What the hell?" she screamed. "I needed to borrow your printer for some work documents, and my key doesn't work." I calmly explained that I had changed the locks because I was no longer comfortable with her having access to my home without permission. I suggested that in the future, if she needed something, she could call or text me first, and we could arrange a time that worked for both of us. There was a long pause before she responded. "Are you serious right now? You changed the locks on your own sister? What if there had been an emergency? What kind of emergency would require you to enter my home while I'm not there?" I asked. She didn't have an answer for that. Instead, she hung up and immediately called our parents. Within an hour, my phone was blowing up with messages and calls from both my parents. My mother left a tearful voicemail about how I was tearing the family apart. My father's message was more direct: "You need to give your sister a key right now. This is not how we raised you to treat family." I didn't respond immediately. I needed time to collect my thoughts and prepare for the inevitable confrontation. The next day, I received a text from my mother saying they were coming over for dinner that evening to discuss the situation. It wasn't a request. When they arrived, Rachel was with them. They had clearly been discussing the situation before arriving, as they presented a united front. My mother started by expressing her disappointment in my selfish behavior. My father followed with a lecture about family loyalty. Rachel sat there with a satisfied smirk, clearly expecting me to cave under the pressure. But I didn't. Instead, I calmly laid out the pattern of boundary violations that had led to my decision. I described coming home to find strangers in my apartment, my belongings damaged or missing, and the complete lack of respect Rachel had shown for my personal space over the years. "I'm not asking for anything unreasonable," I said. "I just want my home to be my home. Rachel has her own place. She doesn't need access to mine." My mother shook her head. "But that's what family does. We help each other out. We share." "Sharing requires consent," I replied. "Rachel hasn't been sharing with me, she's been taking without asking. There's a difference." My father tried a different approach. "What if there's an emergency? What if something happens to you, and we need to get into your apartment?" "I've given a spare key to my friend Sarah," I said. "She lives 10 minutes away and knows to contact you if anything happens to me. But Rachel doesn't need a key. She's proven she can't be trusted with one." This set Rachel off. "You trust some friend more than your own sister? That's messed up." "Sarah respects my boundaries," I replied simply. "You don't." The dinner devolved from there. My parents accused me of being cold and unfeeling. Rachel alternated between playing the victim and making snide comments. When it became clear I wasn't going to change my mind, they left in a huff, with my mother declaring that we would discuss this again when I'd come to my senses. After they left, I felt a strange mix of guilt and relief. I knew I'd done the right thing, but years of family conditioning had me questioning myself. Had I overreacted? Was I being unreasonable? To reassure myself, I made a list of all the boundary violations that had occurred over the past year alone. It filled 3 pages. Seeing it laid out like that reaffirmed my decision. This wasn't about being petty or holding grudges. This was about basic respect and my right to feel safe and secure in my own home. The next few weeks were tense. Rachel refused to speak to me directly, instead sending passive-aggressive texts about how some people don't understand the meaning of family. My parents called regularly, each conversation circling back to when I would fix things with Rachel. I held firm, repeating that I was open to rebuilding trust with Rachel, but that would require her acknowledging that her behavior had been inappropriate and promising to respect my boundaries moving forward. So far, she had done neither. At a family gathering the following month, several relatives approached me to express their concern about the situation. It was clear Rachel and my parents had been sharing their version of events, casting me as the unreasonable one who had suddenly turned against family for no good reason. Rather than getting defensive, I explained my side calmly and clearly. Some relatives seemed to understand. Others clearly thought I was overreacting. I decided it didn't matter what they thought. I knew I was doing what was necessary to protect my peace. What I didn't realize was that Rachel was far from done. She had merely switched tactics, and things were about to get much worse. Update 2. The Escalation. 3 months after changing my locks, I thought the situation with Rachel had reached an uneasy equilibrium. She was still cold toward me at family gatherings, but the daily calls and texts from my parents had decreased. I hoped we were moving toward a new normal where my boundaries would be respected, even if not fully understood. I was wrong. On a Tuesday evening, I was working late at the office when my phone buzzed with an alert from my security camera. Someone was trying to enter my apartment. I opened the app and watched in real time as Rachel and a man I didn't recognize were attempting to pick the lock on my front door. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Rachel was actually trying to break into my apartment. The man with her appeared to be showing her how to use what looked like lockpicking tools. They were talking and laughing, as if this was some kind of fun adventure rather than a serious crime. After several minutes of failed attempts, they gave up and left. I sat at my desk, shaking with anger and disbelief. This had crossed a line I never imagined would be crossed. I immediately called the police and filed a report. I provided them with the video footage, clearly showing Rachel's face and her attempts to gain unauthorized access to my home. The officer explained that this constituted attempted breaking and entering, a criminal offense. I then contacted a lawyer to discuss my options. Given that Rachel was family and this was a first offense that I knew of, the lawyer suggested starting with a formal cease and desist letter. This would serve as official documentation that Rachel had been warned against entering my property without permission. The letter was delivered to Rachel the next day. Within hours, my phone was exploding with calls and texts from my family. My parents were beside themselves, unable to believe I would involve lawyers in a family matter. Rachel was furious, claiming she had just been joking around and had no intention of actually entering my apartment. "Then why were you trying to pick the lock?" I asked when she finally called me directly. "It wasn't like that," she insisted. "Mike is a locksmith, and I was just curious about how it worked. We weren't actually going to go inside." "The video shows you trying to open my door for over 5 minutes," I said. "That's not curiosity, that's attempted breaking and entering." "You're being ridiculous," she shouted. "Are you really going to ruin my life over this? Do you know what would happen if this got out? I could lose my job." "You should have thought about that before trying to break into my home," I replied. "I've asked you repeatedly to respect my boundaries, and you've ignored me every time. This has to stop, Rachel." The conversation ended with her threatening to tell everyone in the family what a terrible person I was. I expected that. What I didn't expect was what came next. My parents showed up at my workplace the following day, causing a scene in the reception area. My father demanded to speak with me immediately about the false accusations I was making against Rachel. My mother was in tears, telling anyone who would listen that I was trying to destroy my sister's life. I was mortified. I had worked hard to build a professional reputation at my company, and now my family drama was being aired in front of my colleagues. I had no choice but to take them to a nearby coffee shop to continue the conversation away from my workplace. "How could you do this to your sister?" my mother sobbed once we were seated. "A cease and desist letter? Really? Do you know how humiliated she is?" "Rachel tried to break into my home," I said firmly. "I have it on video. This isn't about humiliation, it's about her facing consequences for her actions." My father leaned forward, his voice low and threatening. "You need to drop this right now. Call your lawyer and tell him it was all a misunderstanding. Family problems stay within the family." "I've tried to handle this within the family for years," I replied. "It hasn't worked. Rachel continues to violate my boundaries, and you both continue to enable her behavior. It stops now." "So you'll ruin your sister's life just to prove a point?" my mother asked, her voice rising. "What kind of person does that?" "I'm not trying to ruin anyone's life," I said. "I'm protecting myself. If Rachel had respected my boundaries from the beginning, none of this would be happening." My father shook his head in disgust. "We raised you better than this. Your sister made a mistake, and now you're punishing her in the cruelest way possible. Is that what you want? To tear this family apart?" I took a deep breath. I didn't try to break into Rachel's apartment. I didn't bring strangers to her home without permission. I didn't take or damage her belongings. Rachel did those things to me, repeatedly, after I asked her to stop. If the family is being torn apart, it's not because of my actions. They left the coffee shop without resolving anything. My father's parting words were, "You'll regret this. Family is all you have in this world, and you're throwing it away." Those words stung, but they also strengthened my resolve. This wasn't about punishing Rachel or getting revenge. It was about setting firm boundaries and ensuring they were respected. In the weeks that followed, I received calls from various family members, some sympathetic, others critical. My Aunt Susan, who had always been a voice of reason in our family, surprised me by expressing her support. "Rachel has been getting away with this behavior her entire life," she said. "It's about time someone stood up to her." Other relatives warned me that I was making a mistake that could have permanent consequences for our family. I listened politely but maintained my position. This had gone beyond simple sibling disagreements. Rachel had attempted to break into my home, and there needed to be accountability. Meanwhile, Rachel seemed to be telling anyone who would listen that I was mentally unstable and had manufactured the video evidence against her. Some family members believed her, others were skeptical. I tried to stay focused on my life and not get dragged into the drama. I threw myself into work, spent time with supportive friends, and continued seeing my therapist, who affirmed that my boundaries were reasonable and necessary. But the situation was far from resolved. As the police investigation into the attempted break-in proceeded, I knew things were likely to get worse before they got better. Update 3. Legal consequences. 6 months after the attempted break-in, the legal proceedings against Rachel finally concluded. Despite my family's pressure to drop the charges, I had decided to pursue the case. Rachel was charged with attempted breaking and entering, and after initially pleading not guilty, she eventually accepted a plea deal. The terms were relatively lenient: probation for 1 year, community service, and mandatory counseling. There would be no jail time, and if she completed the term successfully, the charge could potentially be expunged from her record. It was a fair outcome, in my opinion. Serious enough to show that her actions had consequences, but not so severe that it would ruin her future. Rachel, however, didn't see it that way. In her mind, and in my parents' minds, I had betrayed the family by allowing the legal process to move forward. They seemed unable to understand that Rachel's actions, not my response to them, were the real betrayal. The day after her sentencing, my mother called to tell me that Rachel had lost her job. The company had a strict policy about criminal charges, and they had let her go when they learned about the case. My mother's tone made it clear that she blamed me for this outcome. "Are you happy now?" she asked, her voice cold. "Your sister's life is ruined, and it's all because you couldn't just let this go." "Rachel's actions have consequences," I replied. "I'm sorry she lost her job, but that's not my fault. She tried to break into my home, Mom. How can you expect me to just ignore that?" "She's your sister," my mother said, as if that explained everything. "Family forgives." "Forgiveness requires remorse," I pointed out. "Rachel has never apologized or acknowledged that what she did was wrong. She's been telling everyone that I'm making this up, even though there's video evidence." My mother sighed heavily. "Your father and I have decided that until you make things right with Rachel, we can't have you at family gatherings. It's too painful for everyone." I wasn't surprised, but it still hurt. "If that's your decision, I respect it. But I won't apologize for protecting myself." "Then I guess we have nothing more to say to each other," my mother concluded, and hung up. The family divide was now official. My parents and Rachel on one side, me on the other. Some relatives chose to stay neutral, maintaining relationships with all of us but avoiding discussion of the conflict. Others took sides, either supporting my right to set boundaries or condemning me for not prioritizing family loyalty above all else. My Aunt Susan remained firmly in my corner. "Your parents have enabled Rachel's behavior for so long that they can't see how destructive it's become," she told me over lunch one day. "They think they're protecting her, but they're actually preventing her from growing up and taking responsibility for her actions." In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life without the constant stress of worrying about Rachel's next invasion of my privacy. I strengthened friendships that had been neglected while I dealt with the family drama. I advanced in my career, earning a promotion that had been a long-time goal. I even started dating again, something I had put on hold during the legal proceedings. Throughout this time, I maintained firm boundaries. I blocked Rachel on all social media platforms and kept my contact with my parents to a minimum. When we did speak, I made it clear that I wasn't interested in discussing Rachel or the ongoing family rift. Around the 8-month mark, I received an unexpected email from Rachel. It was the first direct communication we'd had in months. I opened it with trepidation, unsure of what to expect. The email was surprisingly measured. Rachel explained that her counseling sessions had been eye-opening, forcing her to confront patterns of behavior that went beyond our sibling relationship. She acknowledged that she had violated my boundaries repeatedly and that her attempt to enter my apartment had been wrong. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she wrote. "I know I've done too much damage for that. I just wanted you to know that I'm working on myself and trying to understand why I've treated you the way I have for so many years. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused." I read the email several times, trying to gauge its sincerity. It seemed genuine, but I had been fooled by Rachel's apparent remorse before. I decided to respond briefly, acknowledging her apology and wishing her well in her continued counseling. I didn't offer reconciliation or suggest meeting in person. It was too soon for that, and trust once broken is not easily repaired. What I didn't expect was the response from my parents. Rachel had apparently shared our email exchange with them, and they saw it as an opening for family reunification. My father called, suggesting we all get together for dinner to put this ugly business behind us. "Rachel apologized," he said. "That's what you wanted, right? So now we can all move forward as a family again." "It's not that simple," I replied. One email doesn't erase years of boundary violations or the attempted break-in. I appreciate Rachel's apology, and I hope her counseling continues to be helpful, but I'm not ready to pretend none of this happened. My father was frustrated by my response. So you're just going to hold a grudge forever? That's not healthy. It's not about holding a grudge, I explained. It's about making sure the changes are real and lasting. Rachel and I both need time and space to work through this. Rushing back to family dinners won't help anyone. He didn't understand, or perhaps didn't want to understand. In his mind, an apology should be immediately followed by forgiveness and a return to the status quo. The idea that rebuilding trust might be a lengthy process, or that I might need to maintain certain boundaries even after reconciliation, was foreign to him. We ended the call without resolving anything, but I felt more at peace with my decision than ever before. For the first time in my adult life, I was prioritizing my own well-being over the expectations of my family. It wasn't easy, and the loss of those relationships was painful, but it was necessary. As the one-year mark of the attempted break-in approached, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed. The journey had been difficult, but I had emerged stronger, more confident, and more committed to maintaining healthy boundaries in all my relationships. Update 4. 1 year later. It's been exactly 1 year since I changed my locks and set in motion the events that would transform my family dynamic forever. As I sit in my peaceful apartment, I can't help but reflect on how much has changed, and how much I've changed, during this tumultuous year. 3 weeks ago, I met with Rachel for coffee. It was our first face-to-face conversation in nearly a year, and I approached it with equal parts hope and caution. We chose a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our homes, and agreed to keep the meeting brief. Rachel looked different somehow. The confident swagger that had always characterized her presence was gone, replaced by a more subdued, thoughtful demeanor. She had completed her probation and counseling, and according to her, the experience had forced her to confront deep-seated issues that went far beyond our sibling rivalry. "I've been in therapy twice a week," she told me, her eyes meeting mine directly. "At first, I was just going through the motions because the court ordered it. But then something clicked. I started to see patterns in my behavior, not just with you, but in all my relationships." She explained that she had been diagnosed with certain personality traits that made it difficult for her to respect boundaries or consider the impact of her actions on others. The counseling had given her tools to recognize these patterns and develop healthier ways of interacting. "I'm not telling you this as an excuse," she clarified. "Nothing excuses what I did to you. I'm just trying to understand myself better so I don't keep hurting people the way I hurt you." I appreciated her honesty, but I remained cautious. "Thank you for sharing that with me," I said. "I'm glad the counseling has been helpful." We talked for nearly an hour, covering topics that had been off-limits for most of our lives. Rachel admitted that she had always been jealous of my independence and self-sufficiency, qualities our parents had never encouraged in her. I shared how hurt I had been by their constant dismissal of my feelings and boundaries. "They really did a number on both of us, didn't they?" Rachel said, a sad smile playing at her lips. "Different damage, but damage nonetheless." Before we parted, Rachel handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for a substantial amount, along with a handwritten note explaining that she wanted to compensate me for the property she had damaged or taken over the years. I was genuinely touched by the gesture, though I told her it wasn't necessary. "It is necessary," she insisted. "Part of recovery is making amends whenever possible. I can't undo what I did, but I can at least try to make it right." I accepted the check, understanding that for Rachel, this was an important step in her healing process. We agreed to continue communicating gradually, perhaps meeting for coffee again in a month or so. Neither of us was ready to rush back into a close sibling relationship, but the door was open for something new and hopefully healthier to develop over time. My parents have been a different story. Unlike Rachel, they have shown little willingness to examine their role in enabling the dysfunctional family dynamic. My mother still believes I overreacted by involving the legal system, though she has softened somewhat after seeing the positive changes in Rachel following her counseling. My father remains distant. During a brief phone conversation last month, he mentioned that he was willing to forgive me if I was ready to rejoin the family properly. When I pointed out that his framing suggested I had done something wrong by protecting myself, he became defensive and ended the call abruptly. "Aunt Susan continues to be a source of support and wisdom. Your parents are of a generation that was taught to keep family problems private at all costs," she explained during a recent visit. "They see your decision to involve outsiders, the police, lawyers, even therapists, as a betrayal of family loyalty. It may take them a long time to understand that sometimes outside intervention is necessary and healthy. I've made peace with the possibility that my relationship with my parents may never fully recover. It's a painful realization, but I've learned that maintaining healthy boundaries is more important than preserving relationships that cause harm. The most unexpected outcome of this ordeal has been my own personal growth. A year ago, I was filled with doubt and guilt about my decision to stand up to Rachel and my parents. I questioned whether I was being unreasonable or selfish. I worried about the impact on my family relationships and feared being ostracized. Today, those doubts have largely disappeared. I know with certainty that I had the right to feel safe in my own home, to have my boundaries respected, and to expect accountability when those boundaries were violated. The initial pain of family conflict has given way to a quiet confidence in my own judgment and worth. My therapist calls this developing a strong internal compass, the ability to make decisions based on my own values and needs rather than external pressures or expectations. It's a skill I wish I had developed years ago, but I'm grateful to have it now. As for my apartment, it truly feels like my sanctuary now. I've redecorated, replacing items that held negative memories with things that bring me joy. The security system remains in place, not because I fear Rachel will try to break in again, but because it gives me peace of mind. Last week, I received an invitation to a family gathering for my cousin's engagement. It was addressed to me specifically, with a handwritten note from my aunt Susan assuring me that I was welcome regardless of the ongoing tension with my parents. I haven't decided yet whether I'll attend, but the fact that I can make that decision based on what feels right for me, without guilt or fear of judgment, feels like victory enough. This journey has taught me that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. That family loyalty shouldn't require the sacrifice of personal boundaries. And most importantly, that it's never too late to change patterns that have existed for decades. A year ago, I changed my locks to keep my sister out. In doing so, I inadvertently opened the door to a new chapter of my life, one where I am the author of my own story, no longer constrained by the roles my family had assigned to me. It hasn't been an easy journey, but it has undoubtedly been a worthwhile one.